Come one, come two, anon. It's time to talk Tua Tagovailoa. We got all of that and much more coming up for you on today's episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, football fans, and welcome into another episode of Locked On NFL, your daily podcast, bringing you all the biggest stories from around the National Football League. It is Tuesday, so you've got Luke Braun at Luke Braun NFL on your favorite social media, and myself, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola, your daily NFL experts here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We are so excited to bring you another fun episode today. We're going to get to our yike and our like, what we liked and what we didn't like from the week ahead or the week before. And I'm going to kick things off there, take a look at dark horse candidates. Are they ever really candidates? It sure doesn't feel that way. We're also going to take a look at the first $60 million per year quarterback. Who could it be? Who's on the way? And why Jordan Love's name should be on the top of your mind there. And we're going to kick everything off with Tua Tagovailoa, who is one of those super polarizing quarterbacks in the NFL, you know, the loyalists that are out there when it comes to quarterbacks. We're going to take a look at what it is that makes him elite with a little bit of an assist from a former elite NFL quarterback himself. So you want to keep checking us out here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We appreciate you very much for being here and for making us your first listen of the day every day, and for being an everydayer on the show, which is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Summer is heating up, and so is FanDuel. They're giving you new boosts and bonuses every single day for every customer. It's a very exciting time. So go and check them out today over at FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Luke, I want to, before we roll a clip that we have here from Kirt Warner, who did a stop off over at the Locked On Dolphins podcast with Kyle Krabs, I want to start off our conversation first with, is Tua Tagovailoa an elite quarterback, or is he a guy that has elite traits? I think I can argue that he has elite traits, but I'm not ready to argue that he's an elite quarterback yet. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I think you have more to do before you can get put in the Mahomes, Allen kind of category, right? And as unfair as it is, a deep playoff run would probably do it, even though that's not really the best way to look at that. Mm-hmm. But I think, look, I ended up actually watching more Tua this offseason than I thought, because I was studying Michael Penix, and I was like, what's it supposed to look like with a lefty? So you kind of get a sense, I don't know, elite as a quarterback is such a meaningless term now. Ever since the Joe Flacco saga of the mid-2010s, it just reads like a meme to me.
And the other one from 2023.
Yeah, and Kurt, the clip we're gonna play here is gonna go into this, but he does a lot of the subtle, kind of boring stuff right. And then I think it's just a matter of that explosiveness and expecting that explosiveness to be more consistently there, considering the receivers that you have. You know, when you have Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill there, you expect to be popping off all the time, and they popped off a lot, but it disappeared on them at times. And that I think is that barrier that my brain can't get over if we're going to start putting him in that upper echelon. That said, I don't think it's going to matter when you're the Dolphins deciding whether or not to pay him.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take a look at what Kirt Warner had to say in his conversation with Kyle Krabs over at Locked On Dolphins on the things that Tua Tagovailoa is elite at when it comes to what that category of style is, and also one of the things that he and the team around him could do to elevate his game even more.
There are some things that I believe Tua is elite at. Maybe does better than anybody in the National Football League. And those things are his ability to anticipate, get the ball out quick, and he's got great accuracy in doing that. And so that to me is where he separates himself, where, you know, you've seen this offense be one of the best offenses in the league for the last couple of years. And it primarily stems from those skills of Tua connected with Coach McDaniel's offense and what they're trying to do. And they fit perfectly together. And so that's where he excels. That's where this offense excels. And you watch him week in and week out. They want to try to do the same sort of things every week. And when they're allowed to do that, they are tough to stop. Coach Tua, and then obviously the incredible weapons they have, starting with Tyreek Hill, to be explosive. for me, where Tua needs to get better and where this offense needs to get better is when option number one isn't there. Designing plays that give Tua, a full gamut of things. If the defense takes this away, then this should be open or this should be open. So I think they need to improve scheme-wise in that regard.
So, okay, I hear all of that from Kirt Warner, and he explains a bit here about what it means to be a quarterback that does, as you mentioned, the boring things that we don't boring in terms of things that you don't typically hear the highlights talk about, right? But doesn't do a lot of the creative, expanding plays or extending plays and things like that. How much more important is the ability to be able to create as a quarterback when it comes to evaluating the elite quarterbacks of today?
Yeah, the way I always look at this, and this came up a lot in draft season this year with Caleb Williams and Drake May, who are like way all about the ends of their bell curve, right? The tails of the bell curve, the really high highs, the lowest of the lows, the really cool stuff they do, the baffling mistakes. And everybody wanted to argue about those and say, look at this cool play, but look at this Notre Dame interception. And I think you get a lot of the same with Tua. You'll see this like horrific interception that he threw when he was like concussed. And then you'll see this really cool, bomb to Tyreek Hill or whatever. But none of that is that. And that's what Kirt Warner is getting at is it's the fat part of the bell curve, right? The middle stuff, the, 3rd and 7, and you just got an out 5 yards or 2 yards short of the line of scrimmage that, was an easy conversion because you led him properly, right? That is like not going to make anybody's TikTok fan cam, but it's a really important thing. And the process that leads to those is how consistent are your dropbacks, right? How consistent is your footwork? How, when you wind up, how far back does your wrist go when you're throwing? Like, there's all of these little subtle, detailed things about the things that will show up every single play. There's the stuff that you do on the cool plays, and then there's the stuff that you do on every single play. And the stuff that you do on every single play is what is going to propel you forward or hold you back way more than the stuff that's going to be on, SportsCenter's top 10. That's what I think Kirt Warner is getting at. And I appreciate that a lot about Kirt Warner because he focuses so much on that because his game was all that stuff, right? I mean, he was undrafted. 100%. He was not, the anointed, crazy talent, Peyton Manning coming out that everybody hyped up. He had to be perfect at that stuff to have the success that he had. So of course he is going to be a lot more honed in on those little details. It's context and it's important, when you're listening to him talking about like rookies or whatever. Because that was his experience. But I think that makes him a really valuable voice because nobody talks about that stuff. It's not interesting. It's boring to talk about drop back depth consistency when you could actually see him, scramble out and do a really cool throw on the run and you can drool over all that stuff, or you can argue about interceptions. That, I don't know. I have a newfound appreciation for that stuff because of just what I've learned in the last few months. And what like Kirt Warner gives is really cool there. And in terms of as to like he is really good at that boring stuff. And what holds him back is a bozo mistake sometimes that will undo all of that really, really hard work. But it's that consistent stuff that you do every play that is going to show up on the next 100 plays that's going to propel you forward. Again, like the elite word doesn't mean anything to me. But when it comes to actually making decisions, like paying him, that's the stuff that you need to be looking at.
Yeah, 100%. That's exactly where I was going to go next to wrap up the conversation here is that if I'm the Miami Dolphins, I'm perfectly happy paying Tua. No problem at all because of the fact that he does that stuff on a down-by-down basis. Also helps that amongst that 2020 and beyond draft class, tied for second with Jalen Hurts in game-winning drives. I like to see that in a quarterback as well. Guy that leads that metric, by the way, Justin Herbert with 14. That's a little bit ahead of guys like Jalen Hurts and Tua with 8. I felt like the Chargers haven't even won 14 games here recently. And so it was a little bit of a surprising stat for me to be able to pull, or that when I saw that. But hey, that's another thing that I love seeing in a quarterback. So I'm with you 100%. If I'm the Miami Dolphins, I'm perfectly comfortable paying Tua and treating him as the long-running quarterback moving forward. Coming up next, could Tua or another quarterback be the first $60 million a year quarterback. We're going to dive into that, as well as a little bit of help from our good friend Peter Bukowski, because Jordan Love of the Green Bay Packers is another quarterback in this conversation as well. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On NFL, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of Locked On NFL is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And look, we are experiencing a renaissance right now. We are experiencing the emergence of the WNBA as the premier sport of the summer. Move over, baseball. It's been time for a while. If you want to go get involved, a great way to start is by going to FanDuel.com/lockedon and checking out some of your favorite WNBA props. Caitlin Clark unders have been hitting like crazy. That's an interesting way to go. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers, no matter who you are, with a boost or bonus every single day. There is something for everyone every day. So check back and look at the website or the app often. Head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, make every moment more.
All right, buddy, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On NFL. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. Don't forget to go and check out the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 stream. First ever national sports 24/7 stream on YouTube for free. You can find it every single day, programmed to hit all the biggest stories from around the world of sports from the local experts that know the teams the best. Go and check it out today on YouTube and, of course, on your free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, just like we are here at Locked On NFL. We appreciate you being here. Luke, eventually there's going to be a $60 million quarterback, and some are saying that quarterback could potentially end up hitting the books this offseason with the name Jordan Love of the Green Bay Packers. Here's a little bit from Peter Bukowski to kind of open up this conversation on how this kind of thing works out and why it's something that actually isn't as staggering as it might sound.
If you just take the percentage of the cap, okay, that Joe Burrow got, Trevor Lawrence did not match it because the cap goes up and up and up. So Jared Goff gets 21% of the cap, right? In 2027, 21% of the cap is $69 million. 2027 is not that far from now. $69 million will be not even the top of the quarterback market. It will be like top 5-ish, but not the top. That means someone in 2027 is making $70 million. In fact, if Joe Burrow got his cap number now, his percentage of the cap based on this cap, it's already over 60. So in order to truly match Joe Burrow in terms of percentage of the cap, and this is from a team building standpoint, how you have to outlay these things. It's not necessarily how agents and players think about these things. They say, Joe Burrow is getting $55 million. I want $55 million. And in a way, teams are happy to go, cool, because you're not really matching the Joe Burrow contract. It doesn't make it harder to do anything else if you're paying the same relational amount.
So just to clarify, the Joe Burrow percentage is 24.5%. We'll come back to that here in just a moment. But I want to just live in the kind of Jordan Love arena here for a second. Is he the guy that can get a $60 million per year contract before this season? The reason why I ask that is because he's making $12 million this year. If you give him the extension on top of this year, that kind of drops that average value in terms of what the 6-year deal looks like to like just over $50 million. So it could be a way of giving him $60 million from 2024 through 2029, or until 2029, but not actually giving him that average annual value, which we know there are more important numbers in the average annual value. But does that make sense to give him that contract now?
Yeah, it's a way to put it. It's not typically the way that those contracts are reported. So I still think that this is a bit beyond the pale of a suggestion. I don't think that the Packers will need to do that. But for example, if Joe Burrow did sign 24.5% of the cap right now in this cap environment, that would be $62.5 million per year. So like proportionately that would be that, but that is usually when these contracts are reported, they're reported as the average per year of the extension, not the average per year that the contract now has after you include all the cheap years that are still left on the deal. Or however that all gets kind of like remade, because it'll all get like mixed up. So that like our perceptions are based off of reporting that includes that's just the extension. So it would be a 60 some $million contract. And just the way that the market is, it just hasn't quite blown up that much right now. Even Jared Goff, who's about as hot as hot gets in a payment, is coming kind of year. This year he got $53 million. That was about 20.8%. And I do think, he's a little older, so sure. And you're going to get more when you're Josh Allen or Joe Burrow and you're just coming off of your rookie deal, just like Jordan Love is. But I think if a little bit of age is enough to depress Jared Goff down to a more reasonable place, then I think Jordan Love only having 1 year and not a fully consistent one is more than enough for the Packers to justify maybe not going that hard. I don't think that they would have to do that. I still think the Packers get this done this offseason, but I don't think they would have to cross the $60 million threshold.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that. Like if you're intent on, giving that amount of money, which is not the way that an NFL team is going to work with all this, it doesn't make sense to do that right now. There's not enough off of the 1 year to do that. I think that we're really starting to have the $60 million conversation where we're talking about guys like Tua, who we were just discussing. We're entering the $70 million conversation where we're talking about guys like CJ Stroud in terms of looking at extensions that could be that are going to be on the way in
that's a ways from now.
Yeah,
that's 2 years from now, and in 2 years from now, that won't feel crazy. Like that will be 20% of the cap. I think. Well, I wonder how you feel about this, Ross, because for me, like I was asked a lot when I was covering Kirk Cousins, because my take on Kirk Cousins was always that the money would be fine if he were better. And the money isn't the problem here. It's that there's these issues, and I would kind of try to take it back to like, this is the issue with his play that's holding the Vikings back. And the retort would always be, okay, well, how much would he have to make for you to say that the money is a problem? And my answer was always 25% of the cap. At the time he was making 15, he's making 17 right now with 17% with the Falcons. So he was always hovering around that area. And I was like it would have to be like pretty ridiculous. Well, we're at 24.5 with Joe Burrow. We are getting there. And lo and behold, they've got, T. Higgins is basically 1 year and out. Now they've got this Jamar Chase thing, and the Bengals are already like a overly frugal organization. So if we get to that $60 million place where the Packers are approaching 25%, then we start to get to a point where I'm like, maybe that's too much money for even a good quarterback. But I wonder, where do you think the threshold is for a guy like, let's say Jordan Love really truly is the truth, and the guy that, he was made out to be in the back half of the season, and that it doesn't fall back to earth. Let's say he really is the next Aaron Rodgers. The Packers did it again. How much money is too much for that, to the point where it would be a better decision for the Packers to say, let's go take our chances with the draft and we'll go trade him for 1 million picks?
Yeah, I think that the percentage for me is right where you illustrate it, because we could see it in the NFL right now. 25% feels about right. Look at the Cincinnati Bengals right now, 24.5% when it comes to Joe Burrow, and look at all the stuff that they're dealing with right now. Can they extend Jamar Chase? Can they extend T. Higgins? You've got Trey Hendrickson demanding trades and all these other things. Like, I think that, like, we've talked about that several times on this show now about what's going to happen with Jamar.
I'm bad at the Bengals. That's why they've got a Super Bowl window and they don't want to pay it. It's insane.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy. But that's where I kind of have to look at it, right? And say, okay, well, that might be where that threshold is. And I think that backs up your point from the very beginning, that would be the place where that goes. That was one of the reasons why, like, when the Saints signed Derek Carr to that $40 million a year contract or whatever, and everything. And people it was like 18% of the salary cap. Couldn't care less at that point. And so, like, that was exactly one of the things that I also had to spent some time looking at everything as well. Not a hindrance. Whereas, I think that quarter of your salary cap, well, let's call it what it is, it can make things pretty tough. Make things pretty tough in terms of trying to figure out how to pay the other guys, where to allocate your money in the future, and how to go about it. It's one of the reasons why teams love rookie contracts when it comes to quarterbacks every single time.
Because we're talking about one last interesting detail.
Yeah, please.
As we sort of project toward the future, in all of NFL history, of the top 13 QB contracts by percentage of cap in the year that you signed, so essentially era adjusting all this, of the top 13, 11 of them are active contracts. We are paying, even after considering the cap is exploding, we are paying quarterbacks more than we ever paid quarterbacks, which is why everybody's going crazy about the rookie deal. Now, to take advantage of the rookie deal, you have to actually have a team put together in the first 3 years. You can't say, yeah, look at our rookie quarterback, and then like be in a rebuild the whole time. Panthers. But like, and one of the non-active ones just doesn't quite like count because it's the one Aaron Rodgers signed for Green Bay in 2022, which he still is technically kind of playing on. And we're paying quarterbacks, and the other one is the Russell Wilson contract that got cut. So we're paying quarterbacks more than we ever paid quarterbacks. Keep that in mind, as the Packers don't have an option to say, well, what if we paid Jordan Love but less? No, he says no to that. You have to choose to pay him what the market dictates, or you have to say, okay, let's go back to the draft and see what we can do, which, knowing the way the Packers operate, they'll never do. So Jordan Love's getting paid.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, coming up next, we're going to take a look at our yike and our like, what we liked, what we didn't like from the week before. And I'm going to lead us off here with a little bit of a look at dark horse candidates. Are they actually candidates, or are we just naming some other tier guys? We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On NFL, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, everybody, wrapping up today's Locked On NFL with our yike and our like, which we go through every single Tuesday here on the Tuesday episodes with Luke and I. What we liked, what we didn't like from the week before. And I'm going to kick us off here, Luke. My like is list season. I like list season. I have a good time with it. It's fun. I like the way we did this. We talked about this last year too. We're on very different pages when it comes to this. Luke doesn't like. I'm not going to yuck your yum.
I'll stay quiet.
I love list season. All right. Here's the one list that I'm not a big fan of, though, and this is how I get to my yike. My yike is dark horse lists in list season. If we're just gonna name second tier, offensive player of the year candidates, let's call them second tier offensive player of the list candidates. Like, let's just call them what they are. Very rarely.
My list of who's most likely to be fourth on offensive player of the year voting.
Right, exactly. Like the idea of like dark horse, this, that, and the other. My favorites are the other ones that are like dark horse MVP candidates, and it's a bunch of non-quarterbacks. It's like, okay, we know that MVP is a quarterback award. The NFL also still refusing to add a most improved player versus a comeback player of the year might be my other yike, by the way. But I just think that like when it gets to these kind of like early projections of end of year awards, let's just leave the dark horse stuff out of it. We don't need it. It's not necessary. It's one of those things where like if you nail one and you're right, maybe someone remembers, and that's super cool. But for the most part, it just feels to me like we're just naming the other guys. You know what I mean? It's some type of like SEO.
It's like an honorable mention.
Yeah. Like how are we honorable mentioning before the award even goes out? Like just give me the list of guys that are actually MVP candidates, and then let's just leave it at that. And let's not worry about adding a bunch of space for non-quarterbacks on MVP conversation, because we know the way that the NFL is going to look at it. I don't agree with it, but we know the way that the NFL is going to look at it.
Did you see that they're changing the comeback player of the year like emphasis to actually focus away from like you have to have come back from like a circumstance like injury or some kind of thing that took you out of or that took you out of contention or something like that. You can't just be the player that came back from suck.
Yes,
which always felt a little bit. It's like he was bad before. Like what? Like, but right. So it's a different award, I guess.
That's why I would like the most improved player award added to the conversation. So if you want to do,
because that is like a worthy thing. Like, wow, you sucked and then you got better. Like that's actually a really insane accomplishment, especially at the like fully grown up adult like pro phase of your career.
Yeah. It's wild that it took a guy literally dying on the field and then not winning the comeback player of the year award the very next year for them to go, we should probably actually provide parameters for what this award is supposed to be. Because otherwise,
I still think they did that
the
right.
Joe Flacco show.
He came back to what? To barely making the roster again? I don't know. I get it. He died.
I get it.
But
I understand.
Yeah.
But that's a pretty extenuating circumstance if there ever was one.
Yeah, it is. It makes you really reckon with are we recognizing the peak of someone of what they became, or are we recognizing what they came from? And I think recognizing what they became is a healthier parameter. I don't know. That feels like something more worth giving an award to, but different thing that has nothing to do with all of it. I did want to say, with list season, the dark horse thing and all that does feel a little bit like you're no longer trying to engage with the award in itself in any kind of meaningful prediction. It's like, here are some FanDuel props you can probably shouldn't bet on. Hey, do you think you can get plus 4,000 for Tua to be MVP? Don't do that. Find something else.
Too. When we're talking about list season, just in case no one's really heard the phrase before, what we mean is this point in June to July before training camp begins, where every outlet is doing, here's a list of players you should know, comeback player, potential, MVP player potentials, all those other things. So that's what we mean by list season. I realize we should probably clarify that just in case someone hasn't actually heard that phrase before.
Yeah, and instead of trying to manufacture stuff that I'm not actually interested in, which I can never do, I go a totally different way on my show, and I hope people enjoy it. But actually, a lot of what I do just personally is I start looking toward other sports or other versions of football, no matter how obscure. Like the UFL, had a lot of fun paying attention to that all year. Didn't really cover it. Didn't have it was fun to just be a fan again. But my and I actually did my last year on the Women's Football Alliance, which is definite. I mean, they're playing at high schools. They're on streaming channels, streaming services only. This is absolutely not a recognized thing that's going to get on ESPN anytime soon. And I think we just have to be patient while it builds. Even though women's football's been around for 20 years. But I think with the WNBA having the success that it's having right now, my hope is that trickles over to, college softball. Or, things like the Women's Football Alliance. And one of the things that's happening, Matt Rule announced this week that Nebraska is going to have women's football camps, which is my of the week. I think that really rocks. And an attempt to grow the sport. Ultimately, the argument is always going to be, oh yeah, but who's going to watch women's football? Me, all right? Me and people like me. Okay, I will do that. I will be all over that. Oh my goodness. I would maybe even pitch a Locked On spinoff for it that I would host. I'd be so into it. But because I think just a brand new league of football, regardless of who it is, I'm excited for it the same reason I was excited about the AAF and the XFL and the USFL and the UFL now. I just think it's cool to have more football. I like football a lot. And I don't really need to already have recognized the players because I had them on my fantasy team to appreciate football. Sorry if you're not built like me.
Yeah. I will say real quick too, that a lot of people agree with you. Here in New Orleans, I got to cover the New Orleans Saints inaugural women's or girls high school flag football season, and the crowds were awesome, super into it. Everyone was excited. It was packed. It was really, really neat. So I will say there are others like you. I'm one of them, but there are dozens of us out there. So you're not alone. You're not alone.
I think women's athletics are fairly untapped. There's just a lot of people in the United States and probably around the world, honestly, if it grows big enough. But there are a lot of people in the United States that are female and that are very athletic that deserve a chance to show that off. I think that really, really rocks. My yike is that these football camps will be 7-on-7.
Oh,
that's
God, they were so close.
That's horse crap. Get out of here. All right. Get these ladies on the sled. Here's the thing. If you watch the Women's Football Alliance, these are true football athletes. You got to be big and strong and stout, especially on the O-line. And I think 7-on-7 robs the true football athlete of the chance to show off. Just do track and field. 7-on-7 is not football. It's flag football. It's an intramural thing that you will sign up to do on Saturdays, go to 2 weeks and then kind of fall off of it. It's not professional sports to me. And like, sure, it's okay. You got to start somewhere. I get it. But I think that look, I'm a build through the trenches kind of guy. And I think that also is true of building a sport, and its popularity has to be built through the same physicality that I think we love about men's football needs to be there no matter how small the league is. So I also just hate 7-on-7. If you're a big fan of 7-on-7, you're not a fan of football, and that's fine, but call it what it is. It's an intramural, like, college after class activity. It's not a sport. Get out of here.
Yeah. Give me the full. Give me 11-on-11. If we're going to do it, let's do it. You know what I mean?
Get them on the sled. Get these ladies on the sled. Get them in the weight room, right? Like, this is a sport of combat. This sport is war. It literally was designed to be like after war games. Right. Back in John Heisman processing his World War I trauma. Like, that's what football is. So yeah, this high flying pitch and catch 7-on-7 stuff, I don't know. It doesn't appreciate the spirit of the sport enough for me. Get him on the sled. Get him hitting. Let's play real football. I want to see some teeth knocked out.
All right, Sean, we appreciate you very much as always for being here for another episode of Locked On NFL. For Luke Braun, I am Ross Jackson. You'll have James and Chris here tomorrow, and then you have Luke and another host back on next week. I'm off next week on vacation, but we'll be back the week after. So we appreciate you very much as always for being here with us and for checking out another episode of Locked On NFL, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.